The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to, I don't know why I did that with my hands. Welcome to the History of Heavy Podcast, Episode 3, show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I am your host, co-host from Venice Beach, California, Michael Huntsman, and as always, on the other end of the line, it is my co-host, Big Daddy Dave Lieberman in San Francisco. How are you, Dave?
Hello. I am doing great. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, man. Episode 3, we've recorded these kind of in subsequent weeks, obviously, and at some point, I think our enthusiasm for the enthusiasm of doing the podcast will perhaps wane. But I'm with you, man. I still feel excited. Have kind of an interesting topic to start us off with. If you don't have anything burning that you want to get into before we get into kind of the official content of the show?
I'm following your lead.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with something not at all related to tonight's topic or our podcast, but related to a very popular YouTube channel that I found this interesting that I heard today. And I just want to talk about it with you a little bit before we get started in earnest. Do you know what the punk rock MBA is?
I do not.
The Punk Rock MBA, it was apparently a very popular YouTube channel. In fact, I had 572,000 subscribers, hosted by a guy named Finn McKinney. I was not at all a devotee necessarily of the channel, but I've watched, dozens of his videos talking about a variety thing from, he would get into not only punk, but lots of kind of heavy genres of music, whether that would be doom metal or post rock, or talked a lot about a lot of different things. It came out today or yesterday that he was shutting down his channel and all of his socials because he had determined that he had made enough money on YouTube that he was comfortable to kind of walk away and go do something else. But primarily notable, and the reason I wanted to bring it up for discussion here, just because I thought it was interesting, is that he apparently went on a podcast where he admitted that he never had any real particular interest in punk rock or his topics in general, that he was sort of wanted to see, he was a marketer and wanted to see if he could build a brand from the ground up, and just basically read like Wikipedia entries for the content of his show. And he's like, yeah, I didn't really ever listen to a lot of these bands, but would talk about them because they were in the news or because, the subscribers requested it or whatever. But it turns out this guy's kind of a sham. So I thought that was kind of interesting, given
he's
just the context of what we're doing here, talking about music and our love for the music.
So he's like the Scientology of punk rock podcasts. Like,
yeah,
can you engineer a punk rock podcast? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to assure you that my man Mike Huntsman is no fraud. He is no sham. He is the real deal. The dorm room was lined with records. We had the source material in tangible 3D form before it was streamable. This guy's for real. So I'm the guy who's along for the ride.
Thanks, Dave. No, I wasn't necessarily looking for validation. I just thought it was crazy given the time it would take to do something to the level that he did the Punk Rock MBA. I mean, obviously, if as an experiment and building the brand and getting 560 some odd thousand followers is pretty impressive. But I'm just like, wow, that's pretty wild, man. That's a commitment to something that you don't really believe in. You're essentially playing an actor on YouTube every day, which I thought was kind of wild.
Well, or you could look at it in the framework of an MBA, right? Being a student of this topic and diving deep and really becoming a master of the subject by studying it and going deep. I don't know.
Well, I think that's fine if you present that way, but if you present as, hey, I'm this punk rock guy, which is how kind of he presents. But anyway, yeah. I thought it was kind of interesting. Also, I guess I'm very demonstrative tonight. Maybe I outed the fact that, I got this news. I heard about this Finn McKinney thing today, which is December 18th. This episode 3 of this podcast will be made available in January. So I am saying yesterday, but we are pre-recording these initial episodes of the show. So I guess I just outed us a little bit. And we are starting from 0, right? No, we don't have any YouTube subscribers. We are on Blue Sky because fuck Twitter, fuck Elon Musk, fuck X. So we are on Blue Sky and on Instagram, but we're kind of building this thing from the ground up and not to build a brand or 600,000 subscribers, but just because we love this shit and want to talk about it. So that's
and I think in fact, I think it's more fun this way because we're doing this for fun, for a Wednesday night. Full disclosure, we're outing ourselves. We do these on Wednesday nights, and it's a great way for us to connect with each other and a great way for us to connect with this topic. Because it just doesn't come up in my life in passing anymore. There was a time when it did. There was a time when there was a constant thread of music in whatever crowd I was with. Not so much anymore. So for all the right reasons, we're doing this for ourselves. But what will be fun is to see if there is any traction, if we do connect with other people, if other people find value in it. That will be fun and rewarding.
Yeah. But that's a byproduct.
Yeah, that's a byproduct, and that'll be interesting. But yeah, we're here for the authentic conversation that we're going to have.
I am going to recommend something to you and to the listeners before we get into that authentic conversation, because it speaks a lot to what you just said about being of an age and losing the connected to some of those conversations. I, for whatever reason, have had a stunted growth as it relates to the music thing. Never have lost that passion, the deep dive and the whatever. But Questlove has a great podcast, long-running podcast called Questlove Supreme. And this week he had Adam Horovitz, AdRock from the Beastie Boys on, nice. Who is very specific about how his voracious appetite for music has significantly subsided as he is now 58 years old. And just the way he's talked to that and that change was really interesting. So everyone should go check that out because it's pretty great.
That is. I also want to have just a moment of housekeeping. I have a fancy new gaming podcasting mic, and hopefully this will alleviate the pain anybody suffered through my audio of my last couple of episodes. Mea culpa. That was, rookies. We're rookies. I'm a rookie.
Look, episodes 1 and 2 were on Link Ray's Rumble and the Kingsman's Louie Louie, which were very raw recordings, very raw songs. I thought your raw vocal on those episodes fit perfectly.
I felt like HR from Bad Brains calling from prison to do the lyrics
Sacred
for
Love. Yeah, Sacred Love. Yeah. All right. Well, with no further ado, let's call from prison and get into Dave's Cultural Corner.
Dave's Cultural.
All righty. So welcome to 1964. And I'm going to go through, I'm splitting 1964's Cultural Corner between this episode and the next episode because the next song is also in 1964. So we're just going to kind of focus on January to June. Some interesting and cool things happened. February 25th, a fellow named Cassius Clay beat Sonny Liston in Miami. Boxing match. March 6th, American boxer Cassius Clay becomes Muhammad Ali. So that's just a month, actually a couple weeks apart. March 27th, on a Good Friday, the Great Alaskan Earthquake. This is the second most powerful known and the most powerful earthquake recorded in North American history at a magnitude of 9.2. Strikes South Central Alaska, killing 125 people and inflicting massive damage to the city of Anchorage. As the guy who lives in San Francisco, I think about earthquakes a lot. 9.2 is earth shaking. To
Point of phrase.
To mince words. April 13th at the Academy Awards, the 36th Academy Awards ceremony that was held in 1964, honoring 1963. I thought it was significant because Sidney Poitier becomes the first African-American to win an Academy Award in the category of Best Actor for Lilies in the Field. April 16th, in the Assize Court, I believe that's correct, in Buckingham, England, sentences totaling 307 years are passed on to 12 men who stole 2.6 million pounds in used banknotes after holding up the night train from Glasgow to London, a heist that becomes known as the Great Train Robbery. April 20th, Tho 20, Nelson Mandela makes his I am prepared to die speech at the opening of the Rivonia trial, a key event for the anti-apartheid movement. May 1st, this says at 4 a.m., John George Kemeny and Thomas Eugene Kurtz run the first computer program written in BASIC, which I never knew was an acronym, Beginners All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, an easy-to-learn, high-level programming language which they have created. May 2nd, some 400 to 1,000 students marched through Times Square, New York, and another 700 in San Francisco in the first major student demonstration against the Vietnam War. We alluded in our 1958 Cultural Corner that the Vietnam War has been going on, but it hadn't really caused a lot of social movement. This is the moment where that starts to catch fire. And in May 12, 12 men in New York City publicly burned their draft cards to protest the Vietnam War. And then June 12th, Nelson Mandela and 7 others are sentenced to life imprisonment in South Africa and sent to the Robben Island prison. Other notable things that happened in the media world: Record of the Year, Astrud Gilberto and Stan Getz get Record of the Year for The Girl from Ipanema. And that, of course, was on the album Getz Gilberto, which won Album of the Year. Song of the Year was Hello Dolly, performed by Louis Armstrong. The Beatles.
That, I when we began doing this and started to lay out a format, I didn't expect that the history lessons and or reminders that I was going to be getting during your Cultural Corner were going to be so enjoyable, but I do quite enjoy them. So thank you for that. Also, I will drop a little bit of a shameless plug. I haven't talked about it yet on this podcast, but this is sort of actually a spin-off podcast of a podcast that I've done for a long time with a couple of other friends. Dave has been on that podcast many times, several times anyway. That show is called the Huntsman Hill Polanco Podcast. It's on hiatus right now. Can
you say that slower? You kind of ran through that.
The Huntsman Hill Polanco Podcast. It just rolls right off the tongue. It is a music retrospective where we talk about albums instead of songs. But I'm bringing it up here because one of the most recent episodes we did, episode 289, talking about anti-government songs, Rod gets into some detail about the great special AKA song Nelson Mandela. So worlds are colliding. 1964 was a very big, very important year.
I have that album.
Yeah,
it's Specials AKA or something.
Yeah, Special AKA.
Yeah.
Okay, well, not only was it a important year culturally, part of that culture, of course, was the music, and let's talk a little bit about that music. And tonight's subject, you really got me, by the Kinks. The song was written, interestingly enough, given what the song is most famous for, and that would be a guitar riff. But the song was, interestingly enough, written on piano by Kinks leader, singer, and main songwriter Ray Davies in March of 1964. He played the song for his brother Dave, who is the Kinks lead guitarist, and Dave immediately suggested, as the lead guitarist, no surprise, that the piano line should be converted to a guitar riff and that it would be much more powerful that way. That's kind of what happened. And appropriately coming after last episode, Dave worked out that main riff by playing around with the chords of the Kingsmen's Louie Louie. That's how Dave Davies came up with that main guitar riff for You Really Got Me. So, accident, I don't know. Maybe we're just that good. The Kinks first recorded the song in June of '64, but Ray Davies was extremely unhappy with the results, as the producer of the track had buried that iconic guitar riff under mounds of reverb to where you could barely kind of hear it. When the band's label, Pi Records, refused to fund a second session to re-record the song, Davies threatened that he would never perform the song live or promote it unless they could recut it, which they did. He attributes the moment of standing up against the record label as kind of a career-making moment while making the Kinks' career-making song that sort of established him as the leader of the band and gave him a musical identity that he had been seeking. His quote was, "That song made me exist. I was literally born when that song hit." So this is a very important song, not only to music history, but certainly to Ray Davies personally and the Kinks in general. The final recording of that iconic guitar distortion was created in the exact same way that Link Wray created his sound for Rumble, which was Dave Davies slicing a cut into the speaker of his amp with a razor blade. So go back to episode 1, we talk about that. So that was the mode of the day for effectively creating fuzz or distortion. Another connection to Link Wray would be the song's use of power chords. In fact, American musicologist Robert Walzer identified You Really Got Me as the first hit song ever to be written around the use of power chords. Lyrically, the song is really just about lust and sex. Ray Davies described it as a love song for street kids, which I thought was really, really cool. You Really Got Me was released as the Kinks' third single on August 4th, 1964, and hit #1 on the UK charts the following month. It became the band's breakthrough song, establishing them as one of the top acts in the British invasion in the US, and would later be included on their eponymous debut album, which was released on October 2nd, 1964. You could argue that the legacy of You Really Got Me now is, I mean, I don't think it's even arguable. It's massive, right? You could suggest that heavy metal begins with You Really Got Me. But along with the success and the importance of the Kinks original, the song's legacy is most obviously obvious in Van Halen's 1978 cover of the song, which was used as that band's first ever single and helped launch them into superstardom. So You Really Got Me sort of launched two bands, which is kind of wild, and certainly a style of music. So Dave, what did you think about You Really Got Me then? And what do you think about You Really Got Me in the context of this experiment?
I have a lot of parallel feelings between this song and Louie Louie. When I first heard this song, it tickled that same nerve that Louie Louie did. It's the riff is when you're not used to this style of music, right? When you're first turning on to music, or in the context of history, when this first comes up in the consciousness, it turns something on in you that was there but was dormant. And I felt that with Louie Louie, and I felt that with this song, You Really Got Me. It was another song where when I heard it at first, it's quick, right? It ends it ends abruptly, and you're like, no, more. But it's simple. There's the riff is very clean and clear, and it repeats. It is what it is, but it is enough to grab me and keep me engaged and leave me wanting more of exactly the same. I always liked this song and haven't listened to it in years and years intentionally, but it's one of those things that's in the consciousness of media and Americana because it's such a fundamental song. So I have time for this song. I love this song.
Yeah, same. When we talked about Rumble and when we talked about Louie Louie, I talked about how I can't ever remember the first time I heard those songs. They feel like, even though this obviously isn't the case, but they feel like they've just always been with me or part of my musical life. Not so with, I don't think, any other song that we will talk about for the duration of this podcast, but definitely not so for You Really Got Me. I grew up, I will make this a long autobiography. I grew up in a house of older parents than all of my friends, and thereby older siblings than any of my friends had. So I had the benefit of my parents' music, which was Benny Goodman and Sinatra and Stan Getz and that sort of thing. And then my sisters listening to the Beatles and the Kinks and Steely Dan and the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and on and on and on. My first musical discovery, as with a lot of kids my age, was Kiss. Like, Kiss was the first thing. Kiss was the be all end all. The second thing I loved was AC/DC. But the third thing I loved was Van Halen. Van Halen and their cover of You Really Got Me. I can remember clear as day being in my parents' den, holding that first Van Halen record and looking at the pictures of the four guys on the cover and just thinking, nobody has ever looked this cool. Nobody has ever been this intense. Nobody has ever been this godlike. It's how people, 10 years younger than me must have looked at Zeppelin. But it totally, I mean, I can't say it changed my life because Kiss and AC/DC had already changed my life, but
Right.
but this was a totally different thing. And I probably, given my sister's musical habits and listening behaviors, and just music was around so much of, like, since I was very little, I'm sure I had heard the Kinks version, but my version of this song, I don't know that I would argue that it's a better song today at where I am now, but the version of the song that I love is the Van Halen version. Like, that song was so important to me. And in the context of this conversation, or let me say, but in the context of this conversation, if only the Van Halen version existed, if it wasn't a cover, that song would not be included in the History of Heavy podcast. That song is heavy because what it sounded like, what this version, the Kinks original version, sounded like in 1964. You Really Got Me in 1978 was not heavy compared to the first Black Sabbath record, which had been out for almost 10 years at that point. So it really is all about the Kinks. So talk about You Really Got Me in terms of that heaviness that we're trying to crack on this podcast, and we're fumbling and talking around it. We'll continue to fumble and talk around it because it's an interesting, dare I say, weighty topic.
I love your wordplay. The heaviness that you're talking about here is really interesting because you mentioned, the Van Halen Sabbath correlation. Van Halen is coming out with their first album as Sabbath is coming out with one of their last albums with the Ozzy Sabbath lineup, right? They have established and laid a groundwork for the tree of heavy metal that will branch off in many different directions. But that starts in 1970. We're here in 1964. So the soil that the Black Sabbath tree was planted in is this era. And we're going to talk about some other interesting songs that kind of are fertilizer for that soil. But the Kinks, this song being in the heavy conversation for us, I think a lot of it has to do with the slicing of the cone of the speaker, right? And to give a little bit more color to that, this is that it's the same kind of concept as that guy in the Nissan Altima that's in front of you with the loud bass but the loose license plate rattle. I just the stereo isn't meant to do that, but some other mechanical function, right? There's a tactile piece. This isn't a dial on a pedal. This isn't a post-production effect. This is a hardware feature that is baked into the instrumentation now. And so going that extra mile, making it homegrown and DIY, reaching to find a new sound through this technique and arriving here puts this squarely in our conversation. So this is a heavy song because of all that. And I think that you queued it up right, saying if the Van Halen version was the only version, that wouldn't be heavy because heaviness had existed by then. But this is when that song is born, as well as Ray Davies, apparently.
Yeah, and I hadn't actually thought of this, but our theme song for this show, the first riff you hear is "You Really Got Me." The second riff you hear is Black Sabbath's Iron Man.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Sabbath a little bit more, and let's specifically talk about their relationship with Van Halen in 1978, because I think it's applicable to the heavy conversation. So in 1978, Black Sabbath is on tour for the Never Say Die record, which is, as Dave mentioned, the last record they will make with Ozzy. Well, and the last record for a lot of years that they will make with Ozzy. And Van Halen opens for them on that tour, and Tony Iommi and Eddie Van Halen become lifelong friends. But it is widely reported that Van Halen is routinely blowing Black Sabbath off the stage every single night. It's a different energy. But I think that energy is really interesting, right? Because that transition, that sort of passing of the quote unquote heavy metal torch from Black Sabbath to Van Halen in that area is sort of going from heavy to not heavy, to much lighter, well, I mean, never throw shade on Tony Iommi, the greatest, but a more technical kind of playing, certainly in Van Halen, a party, you said it, sort of pop. So really interesting. And if we look at the list of episodes we will do on this show, we will talk a lot more about 70s songs than we'll talk about 80s songs, right? So as we get into the 80s, things get significantly lighter than they were in the 70s. So I think it's kind of interesting to think about that sort of "you really got me" period to Never Say Die, how much heaviness is happening in there. And, from Never Say Die to the first Black Sabbath record, from "You Really Got Me" to the first Black Sabbath record, how much heavier and darker shit has gotten. You talked about Vietnam, world events, and I don't want to step on your cultural corner for the next episode, but sort of the state of the world, as we have mentioned in previous episodes, has a lot to do with why this music is getting so much thicker and heavier.
Yeah.
So what else on "You Really Got Me"?
I don't have a lot else on it other than this was my intro to the Kinks. And then the rest of what I got exposed to never lived up to this for me.
For the Kinks?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like I was expecting more like this, and Come Dancing is not like this, and
Well, that's the Kinks turning into, that's their version of Van Halen, right? That's who the Kinks
Right.
were in the 80s. That's not who the Kinks were in the 60s and 70s.
Fair, but I didn't hear them in the 60s and 70s because I wasn't in the 60s. So I didn't hear them until the 80s. And that's when I kind of, my musical birth happened.
Right.
Was probably 85. I'm 13 years old, moved to San Diego from Portland. I'm in high school or junior high, excuse me. And I was listening to pop music for a minute and then found alternative rock and started paying attention to music, and it started to mean something. And this happens when you're 14, 13, music becomes a very important part of life and an expression and an identity. So that's when that started happening. So I didn't ever hear the Kinks until that era. And so I was exposed to both at once. But I remember my reaction to You Really Got Me was strong. And I just remember thinking, oh, I like the Kinks, and then listening to other Kinks songs and be like, oh, okay, I like that song.
That's interesting. I absolutely love the Kinks. But I keep saying and then decide to say but instead. My wife would kill me. But the tree branch that I get excited about the Kinks is sort of what became Britpop, and some of the headier, Muswell's Hillbillies and Misfits and Village Green Preservation Society. Like, those records are fucking masterpieces, but they're like early Who, where they're sort of very, very British and very much kind of snapshots of everyday British life. I mean, without Ray Davies, there's no Suede, there's no Pulp, there's no Blur. Like, all those guys were, directly pulling from what Ray Davies and the Faces, obviously, and all those guys were doing. But not heavy. I mean, heavy for the Kinks kind of begins and ends with, Paranoia. Yeah,
Paranoia, All Day and All of the Night. Like,
yeah,
that could
you're
go
right.
heavy.
Yeah, you're right. But other than this song,
That's much
and
later.
certainly, and in the context of this conversation, well, look, I said if You Really Got Me was a Van Halen original, that song wouldn't be a subject on this show. If the Kinks didn't record You Really Got Me, the Kinks probably wouldn't be a topic on this show, because this song has an importance as it relates to heavy. Does the song, as you have now, we have our playlist, we have our timeline and our map, we kind of know where we're going. In the context of that, does the Kinks version, the original version of You Really Got Me, sound heavy to you from a distance?
It does. And in the pantheon of our 3-episode conversation so far, last episode, and I don't know if we're ready for this or not, but last episode you challenged me to pick one, lose one. Both.
So let's set that up. If people haven't heard episode 2. So we are doing kind of a steel cage match, at least for these early episodes. And the notion here is every episode we pit each of our individual current champion against today's topic. So whoever the champion is for each of us on each episode, will carry that into the next episode. I don't know if I did a great job of explaining that, only to say that my current champion is Link Ray's Rumble. Dave had Louie winning the battle against Rumble, the Rumble against Rumble. So now, in that context, Dave, pitting Louie against You Really Got Me, in the context of the history of heavy, which one's moving forward for you?
So You Really Got Me is the knockout here, because this has more of a straight ahead heaviness to it in comparison to Louie. Louie does have that kind of major chord progression that can veer pop, but because Louie comes in the timeline of music and the way that song comes about, it fits into our context and our conversation, and it's heavy according to our timeline. And in comparison to Rumble, I chose Louie Louie because I always connected with Rumble as a pretty mellow song. Now, Rumble is on our playlist for its own reasons, and we'd go into that in episode 1. Check that out. We're not going to relitigate that. But coming forward now, one of the things about heavy to me is a certain key, a certain spectrum of musicality that is more present in You Really Got Me than it was in Louie Louie. So You Really Got Me is my champ this week.
Well, we are unanimous this week because I'm taking You Really Got Me forward as well. It's I love Rumble. Rumble wouldn't be in my personal canon of songs that helped shape me. And although again, it might not be the Kinks version, but this song is still very important to me. So You Really Got Me is going forward for each of us into episode 4, which will be the Sonics The Witch. That will be next week. Dave, fun conversation about the Kinks. Go listen to Village Green Preservation Society right now, and we'll see you next time. That was fun as always, my friend.
Always a good time. Okay, thank you. Bye.